These are 10 cards you should never draft in Duskmourn. Now, never is a strong word, so what I mean by that is either the card is terrible and you should never draft it because it's bad, which is one category for sure, but also some of these cards are just very niche playables or cards that are just going to wheel around the table, so you'll get them with 2 or 3 cards left in the pack, so you'll sometimes play them, but you'll never have to draft them over another card for your deck because you'll just end up with them in your pool at the end. So hopefully that makes sense. First up is Enter the Enigma. This is the sort of card that you'll see with 2 or 3 cards left in the pack, so if you do want to run a copy, then you'll have access to it. But generally, your decks are not going to be interested in this card because your blue decks aren't going to be as interested in attacking. They're going to be more interested in being defensive and then eventually turning the corner. And Enter the Enigma is more of an aggressive card. So if you do have a deck where this would be good, you'll get a copy or 2 of Enter the Enigma naturally over the course of the draft, pretty much every time. But if you are drafting a typical blue deck, you're not really going to want to play this card. Next is Living Phone. This card is just bad. 3 mana for a 2/1 is just not great stats. The fact that its death ability has a real chance of missing and will frequently do so is not great either. The card it hits isn't even that good typically by the stage of the game that your 3-drop is trading off, and overall this card is just a liability and not one that you should be playing. This definitely falls into the category of bad card, don't draft it, don't play it. Next is Rampaging Soul Rager, a card that you can most certainly play if your deck has enough room support, but generally that is more of a niche thing. It's not as common as just playing a typical red deck that is going to be functioning normally. So the fact that you can only really fit this into a deck that has quite a few rooms in it means that you should be seeing these later in the packs. Other red decks aren't going to be interested in it. And even if you are drafting a rooms deck, this isn't a card that you're really going to miss from those decks because there are plenty of ways to like sacrifice rooms for value, and Rampaging Soul Rager doesn't play well with those cards and things of that nature. So you can certainly put this in decks and play it, but you shouldn't be prioritizing it over other cards for your deck. Next is Clammy Prowler, a card that's just bad. 4 mana for a 2/5 isn't great stats. The ability is built around attacking, and this doesn't attack particularly well given it only has 2 power. It doesn't have the stat line to play well in aggressive decks, and even though it's an enchantment, so has some synergy with Eerie cards in the format, it's just not something you should be drafting or playing because you will have better options available. Next is Cackling Slasher. This is the sort of card that you will sometimes have in your pool, and you won't really understand why because you just took it over like random nonsense at the end of a pack, and you'll sometimes want to play it, and you'll usually not want to play it, but it's not the sort of card that you'll ever draft because it's not actively going to help you in your building a better deck. It's just going to be the sort of card that you like, oh, I guess I can play a 4-drop here, and I'll put a Cackling Slasher in, but it's not a card that you actively ever want to prioritize. It's not the sort of card you will ever miss having, and as such, it's not a card you should be drafting. Next is Scrabbling Skullcrab. If you're trying to win, I do not think you should draft this card and put it into your deck. Sometimes you'll want to do something fun or do something off the wall, and Scrabbling Skullcrab can definitely lead to some interesting, unique situations, but because Mill is not a supported archetype in this format, the Skullcrab is just going to usually not be able to get across the finish line and mill your opponent out all the way, which means that you're just enabling their graveyard synergies and helping them when you mill your opponent. If you're milling yourself, then it means you basically put in a 1-mana creature that didn't really have a huge effect on the game just to enable your other synergies, and you're usually not going to have synergies that are worth putting a Scrabbling Skullcrab into your deck for. And also, the stat line of a 0/3 doesn't block as well in this format because the Manifest Dread creatures, which are 2/2s, which this would normally block pretty well, are a little bit harder to block because they can threaten to flip into bigger creatures that just eat the Scrabbling Skullcrab. So overall, I don't think you should be drafting this card or playing it, but if you're trying to do something creative or do something off the wall, then you can do this as a funsy card, but not one that if you're trying to seriously win. Next is Commune with Evil. This card is just inefficient. 3 mana for a little bit of card selection and life gain is just not going to be worth it. You can get this card really late in your drafts, and if you're not getting it late, then you're probably dodging a bullet because you shouldn't be playing this card anyway. It's the sort of thing that just makes you fall behind on the board state, and as such, you don't want to be putting this card in your deck or playing it. Just avoid this one. Next is Grab the Prize. This is the sort of card that your deck can definitely play 0 to 1 copies of, generally 0 copies of, but if you do end up with a copy of it, you'll put it into your deck sometimes. You're just never going to go out of your way to prioritize this card, and you're not going to really care that much if you have this card in your pool at the end of it. There are plenty of ways to spend your mana in this format. There are plenty of things to do where you can get value and use your extra cards and things of that nature. And as such, Grab the Prize is not going to be a card where you're like, dang, I really wish this pool had a Grab the Prize. And as such, it's not going to be a card that you're really going to have to prioritize. Next is Erratic Apparition. This card is just weak. 3 mana for 1/3 worth of stats is just really, really poor. Even though this can sometimes chip in for a little bit more damage, the fact that you're getting such low stats on the baseline means that this card is just going to really be a liability if you're ever in a situation where you're behind and having to block. Your opponent's going to play like a 3 mana 3/3, and then you're going to play your 3 mana 1/3, and they're just going to be able to start hitting you really hard every turn. There are also creatures in this format that really want to be blocked, and you really need to be able to trade off with due to the survival mechanic, and so having such a small statted creature for 3 mana is a real weakness, and as such, I don't think you should be playing Erratic Apparition. Finally, we have Unwanted Remake. This is a 1 mana removal spell technically, but the fact that it makes the controller manifest dread means that casting this on your opponent's creatures is really, really poor, because you're giving them a real resource, a real creature, and something that can actually impact the outcome of the game when you cast your Unwanted Remake. Now, if you do cast this on your own creature in response to a removal spell, that would technically let you manifest dread, but that's a very niche situation. Using this as some sort of glorified sacrifice card is just not going to be something you want to do, because that's not going to come up often enough to make up for the awkwardness of playing this card, and as such, you should just leave this one on the sidelines. Don't draft it, don't play it, and you'll be much happier. That's going to do it for this video, though. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag nuance in the comment section down below, because some of these cards you will play, even though you never really will draft them highly. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.